We can now hear you, I think, in there. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Great. We're going to start, Mr. AH, with Sir Brian making a restriction order.
I don't know if you can see me or not, but you'll hear me speaking. Can you hear me?
I can hear you speaking, yes.
As you can understand, I was going to say see, but you can't. As you can understand, this witness is not in the room. He is witness W1006. In his case, I make the following order. The name and address of witness W1006, that's Mr. A.H. to you and me, that's how he will be known. The name of any member of the witness's family, and any other identifying information such as the witness's image or a description of their appearance, or in this case the sound of his voice, cannot be disclosed or published in any form unless express permission is given by me or by the solicitor to the inquiry acting on my behalf. Witness W1006 must be referred to only as Mr. A.H. This order remains in force for the duration of the inquiry and at all times thereafter, unless otherwise ordered, and I may vary or revoke the order by making a further order during the course of the inquiry. Ms. Richards.
Mr. A.H., I think you're now going to be asked to swear the oath or affirmation.
Mm-hmm.
Your name is known to the inquiry. Please repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely and truly.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly.
Declare and affirm.
Declare and affirm.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Mr. A.H., you have severe haemophilia A, which was diagnosed when you were a baby.
That's correct.
And from the age of 1 in the late 1970s, you were treated with factor 8 for your bleeds.
That's good. Yeah.
And during this time, you were under the care of Lewisham Hospital, and you'd receive factor 8 fairly frequently, perhaps as often as every couple of weeks.
That's true, I was, yes, sir.
In terms of the product that you received, we've got a printout from the UKHCDO database, and that shows that in the period from 1978 through to the mid-1980s, you received occasionally the NHS BPL factor 8, but rather more frequently you received a variety of different commercial products, pretty much all the products that were available at the time you as a baby and young child received.
Mm-hmm.
As far as you know, were your parents told anything, given any warnings or information about any risks of infection associated with the products?
No, none at all. They were never informed of any risk.
It was in 1984 or thereabouts, when you were 7 or so years old, that your parents were given some information about your diagnosis. What were they told?
So it would have been my mother. My mother always attended appointments with me or for me. And she was told that I had tested positive for the HIV virus and that they should enjoy me and my life as much as they could and prepare for me to die within 5 years.
Were they given any other information at the time about the virus or any practical steps that should or could be taken to manage it?
I do believe they were told that it was a difficult virus to catch and to treat me the same as any other boy.
Now, you weren't told that at the time, given your young age.
No.
But you've described in your statement how, even before you were told, the atmosphere at home and family relationships changed. What can you recall about that?
Yeah, it changed very much so. I remember the household being happy, mum and dad laughing and joking and listening to music a lot, dancing. And then after my diagnosis, the household became quiet. It was communication was strained. My dad became introverted, and there was there was a lot of stress. And as a young child, and my sister being young at the same time, we could feel it. We could feel the stress, and it's almost like we knew there was something wrong even at that early age.
It was about 5 years before you learned, when you were 12 years old, that you were HIV positive. How did you learn that information?
So I had been admitted to hospital with a HIV-related illness. At that time, I didn't know I was positive. I developed a severe cold and chest infection. We were on our summer holidays, and I just thought this is very strange to be this ill in the summer. Usually it's the winter we get pneumonia, we get coughs and colds, don't we? And it all seemed very odd to me, and I was. It was worse than any other, cough or cold I'd ever had. I was very disoriented, high temperatures and feeling terrible. So I was then admitted to hospital, given antibiotics, and at this stage I still didn't know why I was there or what was wrong with me. Sorry, did you ask how I became aware?
Yes, how you learnt this news.
Yeah, so I think it was probably on my second admission to the hospital, because from this point onwards, I was frequently admitted, and I was one of the older, so I was around 11 or 12 years of age. And I was on a child ward. There was a play specialist that was there for the children and a teacher. And I kind of developed a relationship with this play specialist, and she took a shine to me. She seemed to be very sympathetic towards me, more than the other children there. And she took me out one day. She had an errand to run. It was internal mail for the hospital, and she said, "Would you like to come along with me?" And I'd take any opportunity to get off the ward. So I said yes, of course. And we wandered around the hospital delivering mail. And then I could tell from her that she was uneasy about something. And at this time, I realised she was plucking up the courage to tell me that I was HIV positive. She took me outside. We had a chat, and she said to me, she told me I was HIV positive, and that, I didn't really know what that meant at the time. But she said, you've got to be very careful when you're around girls. If you cut yourself, that's basically what she said, and that was the reason why I kept becoming ill. I found this shocking because surely if anyone should tell me, it should be my parents or a doctor. And from that time onward, I've become very introverted. She took me back to the ward, and I just sat on my bed, and I didn't know what to think. I was shocked and disturbed. I was 12 years old. I couldn't process that information correctly.
And you've said that in your statement you saw her one more time before she left. She was asked to leave the hospital at a later stage when the nurses found out about this. And you asked her why she decided to tell you that you were HIV positive, and what was her response?
So obviously, the nurses and doctors found out very quickly what she'd done and what she'd said. She was asked to leave. I saw her one more time, and I asked her, why did you tell me this? Why did you say this to me? And she replied with, I thought it was very unfair that you didn't know. And I very soon found out that when I was into the ward, my parents said, we don't want him to know right now, he's very young, we would like to do that ourselves, like to tell him ourselves. So in effect, this play specialist felt that was unfair, that wasn't her judgment to make. I had built up a very good friendship with her, so I didn't blame her at the time for this, but thinking about it later on, she had no place to do what she did.
And you've described in your statement that this was the time when you began having psychological difficulties. You'd been given this information in this way. You felt confused and lonely, and it was the beginning of a very confusing time.
Yeah, I definitely started to develop psychological difficulties, and I felt scared, lost, and I couldn't, as I said, I couldn't process the information. I was very confused. Why would this happen to me? It was, an extremely difficult time,
What was the effect after you'd learnt your diagnosis? What was the effect of that on life at home and your relationship with your parents once you knew that this information had been not previously provided to you and they knew that you knew?
Mm-hmm. Well, my parents explained why they didn't tell me straight away. I felt angry because I was 12 years old, thinking I'm nearly a teenager. Why didn't you tell me these things? At later stage, I completely understood why they didn't tell me while I was that young. I was angry. I became introverted. I'd stay in my room. Communication between my parents and I just became even more difficult, and I felt that I had to protect them. I knew they were upset by this. I knew it was incredibly difficult for them. So I literally took it all on myself. That I was causing people to be hurt, and I wanted to protect my parents. So I didn't talk about it. I wouldn't talk about it, and I stayed away from them as much as I could.
You also learned at a relatively young age that you'd been infected with hepatitis C. How did you find out about that?
Yeah, so that was around between 89 and 90. I was back on the ward in hospital with a HIV-related illness, and I was in a bigger bay this time. I wasn't in a room on my own. I was in a bay with other beds, but there were no other children in these beds. A nurse came in to see me, and she just flippantly said, "You've been tested positive for the for the Hep C virus." I didn't know what that was, so she briefly explained it to me. She said, "This won't become a problem for around 12, 13, 14 years. So it's nothing much for you to worry about." Kind of, for me, it was indicating that, HIV/AIDS would kill first, so it wouldn't matter. And then she just walked away. My parents hadn't been called in to hear this information with me. No one was with me. She just told the information and walked away.
It was, I think, sometime after that your parents decided to take you to see a specialist at St Mary's Hospital. And in the period that followed, you said in your statement you found your new clinicians more helpful and forthcoming in terms of the information that you were provided with.
Exactly. They took me out of Lewisham Hospital to St Mary's in London, where there was a specialist HIV doctor. I was treated so much better there. They had a lot more information about the virus and the HIV-related illnesses. I felt awful. I was, I had full-blown AIDS by this point, and I felt terrible. I didn't really want to make the change of hospitals because I was so happy with Lewisham. I'd been there all my life. But after a while, I felt this is a better place for me. They're so much more educated on this virus and what it's going to do to me. It was at this point that obviously I felt terrible. Every night I went to sleep to die. I wanted to die in my sleep. I wanted when I woke up each morning as that feeling of just hurting everyone around me and causing stress was just too much to bear. And I felt so terrible. I really just wanted to die.
Because it was in your early teens that your HIV diagnosis was progressing to AIDS. So you were physically very unwell, as well as having to deal with the emotional, psychological and mental impact of the diagnoses.
Exactly. It was a hell of a lot for a young boy or a young teenager to deal with. It was impossible. I couldn't deal with it. I just did the best I could. I've always said I did the best with the cards that I'd been dealt with in life. I just wanted to try my best and survive.
You've described in your statement the profound psychological impact of the diagnoses, the infections. You became very depressed, introverted, and later suicidal. And you didn't have anyone you felt you could talk to. We've heard from other witnesses about the stigma of HIV and AIDS in the 1980s and 1990s and how it affected them. Can you tell us how that affected you?
So, I suppose it started with the media and the adverts on TV, the scaremongering, and as haemophilia and HIV became more widely spoken of and linked, there was an occasion where my mother was called into school to see the headmaster, and he outrightly asked her, has got AIDS? My mother felt forced to cover up the truth. She just wanted me to be treated as a normal boy and not be kicked out of school, ostracised that way. So I don't think the headmaster ever believed her because of the feelings that I got from the teachers and the supervisors. After that, everyone just looked at me with disgust. I just felt they were all talking about me behind my back. So that was my first stigma that ever affected me. A later date, my mum told me when she went to pick me up from school, the parents wouldn't talk to her. No one would talk to her. As I say, haemophilia and HIV was linked with the news. It was all over the papers. And that's when stigma began for me. Later on, I was at my local swimming pool. And one of the lifeguards, I said I had haemophilia to one of the lifeguards, and she said, she asked me if I was an AIDS kid, and I didn't understand what she was talking about at all. I went to my nurse at the time, and I said, what's an AIDS kid? And it wasn't until many years later when I was in my 20s that she said to me, I remember when you said that to me, she said, and I didn't know what to say to you. So, of course, she didn't answer the question, but I became aware that if you talk about haemophilia, then people begin to link AIDS and HIV, Hep C to that.
And although times have changed, perhaps hopefully do without the echo of the voice. Although times have changed, you still are conscious of the stigma, in particular in relation to your own family nowadays.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's why I'm anonymous. I want to be an anonymous witness now. I don't want my daughter to suffer from stigma the way I did. My wife kind of lives a double life where she doesn't speak about. It's hard to speak about me and my illnesses when she was at her place of work, in case people started to link things together again. I believe a lot has changed with the in the way of stigma, but just not enough. And our main priority now is to protect our daughter from any kind of stigma, especially in school. And in fact, my wife's mental health has been severely affected by this, and on top of all of the illnesses I've had as well recently.
In your teens, you'd been prescribed opiate painkillers in hospital. Can you tell us about what followed from that?
So, well, there's two things that followed from that. I was given opiates from a young age. Being a haemophiliac, I was in a lot of pain, but also with illnesses, I was also in a lot of pain. And so I began to self-medicate with opiate painkillers, not really understanding what I was doing, but realising that when I took these pills, they made me feel better, that I cared less about what my difficulties in life. And I began to increase the amount of painkillers I took every time until I was taking handfuls of opiates. And then when I finally told someone, it was a nurse, I was made aware that was, I was, it was risk-taking behaviour. I was taking overdoses every time. I would just take an overdose of opiates and then just fall asleep on the sofa and feel better. But there's a bigger implication of well, not my opiate use, but the opiates I was given in hospital. I was every time I was admitted, I was given pethidine, basically. And as haemophiliacs can't have intramuscular injections, I always had it IV. So I became addicted to opiates every time I went into hospital. And on one occasion, there was a doctor that came to me early in the morning, must have been about 3 a.m. I'd complained of being in pain again, needing more pain control. And he came to my room and he asked me if I liked pethidine. And I was young, I felt ashamed to tell the truth, but I said, yes, I do. He said to me, do you like the feeling it gives you when it's pushed into your vein? And again, I said, I was very shy and kind of ashamed to answer these questions, but I tentatively said yes, I do. And he said, do you like the rush it gives you through your body? Again, and I said, and at this stage I really felt awkward, but I said yes, I do. And he then proceeded to push it into my vein extremely fast. When other nurses or health nurses or doctors, when they give it over a time period, so that they give it slowly and over a time period, so that you don't get that shot of euphoric feelings. He just pushed it into my arm very, very fast, and I won't lie, I felt very good, but just euphoria filled my body. But I realised this was wrong. And the protocol after giving someone a shot of pethidine is to sit with them, just in case there are any adverse effects. This guy just left my room. He just left me on my own.
And you transitioned, as you put it in your statement, from using legal drugs to self-medicate to becoming embroiled in illegal drugs, which you would use because of your addiction.
Yes, and to just escape my everyday life that I couldn't handle. I would have done anything. I even thought of suicide just to escape the how awful I felt. It was so difficult when I was younger.
You put it in your statement this way: it was your way of escaping the mental torment you were experiencing,
exactly.
Of every night going to sleep wanting to die and being disappointed when you woke up each morning.
Very much so.
How physically has your health continued to be over the years? You've experienced lots of illnesses and infections and suffered the effects of the antiretroviral medication. What can you tell us about that?
Sorry, could you repeat that question,
Certainly,
please?
I'm sorry, it was a long question. I'll break it down. You've experienced many infections over the years as a result of your HIV. What could you tell us about that?
So it all started with pneumonia, bouts of pneumonia, numerous each year. And then later on, as I got worse, as my CD4 count literally dropped to 0, I had PCPs, a type of pneumonia. And then the PCP spread to my kidneys, and the doctors had told my parents they'd not seen this much before, if ever, and they didn't know what to do with me. Basically, my parents were told I was going to die. I think they gave me every drug they could to save me, and that was probably as a youngster, as a young teenager, the worst times for me, the worst illness I had. I had a kidney biopsy so they could find out what was wrong, which went wrong. They, when they were giving the biopsy, they put the needle through a major artery, and I bled profusely for days, just complicating matters even more. On top of the pneumonia and the kidney problems, I had horrible, just constant stomach pains, headaches. I was tested for I think it was brain cancer or a tumour on my brain, which came back negative. These were the illnesses I had in my younger years. The other, what I would call minor stuff, would have been incredibly itchy skin, lesions all over my legs and my arms that I would just scratch off. I'd scratch everything off and then just bleed and need to be bandaged up. But the strange thing was I felt cleansed by this. If I scratched all these lesions off, I felt as though I was cleansing myself from the virus or the illness. That was the way my mind was working. In fact, what I was doing was just causing myself to bleed a hell of a lot and causing more infections by doing that. My doctor spoke to me once and said, my CD4 count was 0 for 7 years. I literally had no immune system for 7 years, and he'd never seen that before in a patient.
You were given AZT. What happened?
Yeah, I was given AZT from the age of 12, so shortly after my first bouts of pneumonia. As you probably heard from other witnesses, at that time it was a very new drug, and they didn't know what kind of dosages to give to children or even adults. They just didn't know. So later on, I found out they were giving me more of an adult dose of AZT, which had terrible effects on my body. Vomiting every morning, diarrhea. It would knock my red blood cell count, so I was anemic many times, and I had to go into hospital to have blood transfusions for that, just to top me up. But again, my red blood cell count would just get knocked back down again. I literally couldn't leave the house for hours and hours in the morning because I had the most terrible diarrhea. I couldn't, whatever medication I used to stop it just really didn't work. It was a terrible drug to give, constant headaches, stomach pains. Yeah, it was meant to be helpful to slow the virus down, but I believe, as some other people said, it just made us feel worse. And today I don't think it really helped much at all.
In 2007, you underwent treatment for hepatitis C with interferon and ribavirin for 12 months. What was that treatment like, and what was its effect on you?
Yeah, I did 12 months of interferon and ribavirin, and it just changed me. I wasn't, overnight, it changed me. I wasn't the person that I was previous to taking these drugs. I became incredibly angry, had violent outbursts. It made me anemic. I was very, very weak. My now wife, who was my partner then, just felt like she was living with a stranger. She didn't know who I was. I didn't know who I was. My wife had to go part-time on her job to look after me. Also, at the time, my sister-in-law was living with us, and I just felt like I scared her all the time. I mean, I was an angry person, and I believe I did scare her. I turned into a monster, basically. I was quite psychotic, to tell you the truth. It was an awful time, and I believe that was the time that I started to develop PTSD type symptoms, so post-traumatic stress. And even after the treatment, I felt incredibly anxious, and it's left the after effects of it. I've still got things with me now that, mental health difficulties due to that treatment.
The hepatitis C virus cleared from the treatment, but amongst other things, you continue to experience what you've described in your statement as intrusive flashbacks to that time.
Absolutely, yeah. So I actually cleared the virus in 3 months. I remember my Hep C doctor bouncing up and down in his chair. He was so happy. Well, I couldn't care less because I felt extremely ill and possibly suicidal at the time. He was very happy, but I had to carry on doing 12 months of this treatment. And then after that, I started to develop these intrusive images, and these images were of myself being attacked from behind. It was always that I was being attacked, and I could see I could see it in my head. I'd be walking. It used to happen when I walked down the road to a shop, and it was almost that I could visualize someone coming up behind me and stabbing me in my back, my lower back, to be precise. Very strange. So I would feel quite vulnerable. I looked over my shoulder a lot. Very, very strange. Very strange. And I've discussed this with a psychologist, and I've never been attacked like that. I've never been hurt like that. It's very strange, very strange. And again, the vulnerability that causes is it's disturbing, very disturbing.
Had you previously at any time been offered psychological support or counselling during your teens and young adulthood?
Yeah, in my teens, I was, probably earlier than that, I was sent to a child psychologist. And I just sat there quiet. I didn't answer this guy's questions. I didn't want to be there. And being a trained now, looking back at those times, he didn't know what to do with me. He didn't know what to say. And in fact, after that, I've had counselling and since. And a lot of the time in my teenage years, it's very, very clear to me now that they just didn't know what to say to me. So I never received any helpful counselling, any helpful or structured ways to get over the issues that I had.
In 2012, you were diagnosed with chronic kidney disease, and that led ultimately to a kidney transplant in 2016. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So my kidneys were declining, and I was, as we all are, we have appointments with a HIV doctor, and the blood tests would show that my kidneys were declining. This was made clear to me, and I was told to drink more water, simply just drink more water, until it got to the stage where I was sent to a renal specialist. And I went to see a doctor at Guy's Hospital, and he just bluntly came out with the fact that I needed a kidney transplant. There was nothing they could do, and that I needed a kidney transplant. And I couldn't believe what he was saying to me. I had to ask him to repeat what he'd said, and then it became clear. I processed the information he was giving me, but I couldn't. I thought at this stage in 20, I can't remember the year now when he told me, but I thought all the illness it was over. I'd come through being a teenager to a young man, suffered a hell of a lot, had so many illnesses and problems that I thought, this is over now. I can live my life. And then I find out I need a kidney transplant. And then before I went to see the renal doctor, I was given no indication by anybody else, any other specialist doctor, that I had to expect that I would need a transplant. It knocked me for six. I didn't know what to do.
And you've given a lot of thought to what caused your kidneys to fail, and your belief and understanding is that it can be traced back ultimately to the hepatitis C infection.
Yes, there is. Once I started to do a bit of research, or mostly my wife was doing the research, we managed to talk to a professor, a renal professor at Guy's, because the not knowing what had caused the deterioration of my kidneys was horrible. It was, again, I was mentally tormented by this. I think the not knowing is sometimes the worst part. And so we saw this professor, and we said, could my renal failure be linked to hepatitis C in any way, even though I'd cleared the virus by now on treatment? And he said, well, yes, absolutely, completely. And we were shocked. We didn't expect, an answer like that. Well, the fact that he would be so sure that it could have been Hep C. And I said to him, but I've had treatment, and I never had a high viral load for hepatitis C, so it never became very destructive for me. And he said, no, it wouldn't have been. It can be the underlying effects of Hep C, just like what you'd call a grumbling appendix. He said the grumbling element to Hep C, it can cause kidney failure. So I was shocked by that. Happy that we cleared the Hep C virus years before, but then thinking, well, I may not have got away with it all. It could have damaged me like this. And again, I say could have, but it seemed quite clear to this guy that that's what would have contributed to my renal failure.
Earlier this year, you had to have major heart surgery. Could you tell us about that?
Yes. I began to have angina, which I was in denial. When I felt these pains in my chest, I was in denial. And I'd had, as I've had most of my life, difficulties with my mental health. I thought I was having panic attacks, and that's why my chest was hurting. So I kind of denied the fact that I could have a heart issue. And actually, in effect, these angina attacks only came on when I was injecting my clotting factor. So initially I thought I might be having a reaction to the clotting factor I was giving. Not that I'd ever had one before. I'd asked nurses what it would feel like if I had a reaction, and I was told you would definitely know about it. Nothing more than that. So when I was I was on prophylactic treatment, using treatment every other day. And when I was infusing it, I would get pains in my chest. And I thought, well, this isn't right. This is strange. It happened once or twice, and then it started to happen every time I gave myself an injection of factor clotting products. I was worried by it, but I didn't want to admit to myself that there may be something else wrong with me. So I went, I don't know, maybe a year doing this, just living in denial and telling myself, there's nothing wrong with my heart, until I started to get angina. Well, I had angina just on simple exercise or walking fast. I would feel something wrong. So then I actually, the next thing that happened was I was giving myself a shot of clot. In fact, so late at night, I was in bed, I think it was about 10 or 11 o'clock, and I injected this factor. When it finished, I felt really ill, cold sweats, pains in my chest, a pain along the left side of my jaw, couldn't breathe properly, felt absolutely awful. And I thought, I didn't really panic, but I thought, this is really bad. There's something wrong with my heart. I didn't wake up my wife. I just, I would, all my life, there'd been a lot of panic around me and people rushing around, and I didn't want any of that. So I should have called an ambulance, but I just fell asleep. And I then found out later, I was lucky. I woke up in the morning. The next morning, I did wake up. I went to my local haemophilia centre. They took blood tests, one called a TROP-T test, which measures enzymes in the blood that can be created when you've had a heart event, as they call it. This TROP-T result came back as elevated, and I asked the doctor, what does that mean? And he said, it indicates that you could have had an event. I said, what sort of event? What are you talking about? And he said, a heart attack. So then I thought, oh my God, now I've got something else to contend with. And the thing was, ever since I'd had the kidney transplant, I couldn't recover. I couldn't retrieve any kind of stamina after the kidney op. I was very weak, and I couldn't really understand this, but it seems that I'd had my heart arteries had been damaged. I later found out they'd been damaged for years. This had been an ongoing thing. My arteries were shrinking. They were extremely thin in some areas, and then they were aneurysmic, so they were very swollen in other areas. This was after it was all diagnosed and I was in hospital being tested. I found this out about my heart arteries.
And you had a triple heart bypass operation?
I had a quadruple heart bypass operation. That won't be in my statement because when I wrote my statement, they told me triple. They didn't want to open me up, obviously. They thought I would have a lot of problems with bleeding, so they tried to control my condition with medication. And they were giving me very high doses of medication, which weren't working. I was still having angina. So I went back to the cardio clinic and spoke to a doctor. And I said, look, I'm not getting any better, or the symptoms aren't going away. He then said to us, to me and my wife, do you want to have a look at... I'd had some scans done. He said, do you want to look at the scans? And stupidly, well, I'm always interested. So I said yes. And he showed me on the screen my heart and the arteries around it. And they looked terrible. They looked awful. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. As I say, they were what they call... I had lesions and aneurysms in the four major arteries of my heart. My LAD, and I'm not sure what that abbreviates to, but it's also nicknamed the Widowmaker artery. That was blocked, 98% blocked. So the only thing that was keeping me alive was the fact that my heart, my clever heart, had done its own bypass in a way. It had used other veins and smaller arteries to bypass these blocked ones to give me enough to push the blood around my body enough to keep me alive. But still, I had these. I had angina to alert me to this problem.
And you,
go on.
Sorry, Mr. AH. You've been told by your doctors that the heart problems that you've described are, in large part at least, due to the immense strain on your heart through the HIV infection and illnesses and the treatment you've received for HIV?
Mm-hmm. Yes, some of the drugs that I've taken over the years haven't been good for the heart. My actual heart is fine. The function of my heart is good, but the arteries were destroyed. I had an arterial disease that has been attributed to some of the medication I was taking, some of the HIV drugs.
In your statement, you say this about the impact of your infections. The impact of HIV and hepatitis C infection upon my life has been all-encompassing since I would have been infected from the age of 1 year old. I didn't have the chance to experience life without these viruses. What would my life have been like without HIV and hepatitis C? This is a question which has affected my mental health considerably over the years, so I came to the conclusion that I must do my best with the hand that I've been dealt.
Absolutely. Like I said earlier, the not knowing is possibly the worst thing. I've strived really hard to live as normal a life as I can, and now, you know, I've been lucky to I met a partner. Now I'm married. We have a daughter. That's a large amount of my life. I feel that I have some normality, but in earlier years, not at all. Even right back to childhood, my family was affected by all of my illnesses. My sister felt that she was neglected because of my parents just focused all attention on me when I was ill all the time. It caused all sorts of difficulties at home. You know, I love my sister very much, and I'm upset that she felt left out, and that's a common theme. You know, it is a common theme, but just everything about my life has been different because of these viruses, or I don't even know how life could have been different. I'm hoping it would have been a lot better, and I can imagine it would have. Again, yeah, all-encompassing. I don't know who I am and what I am. A lot of me is a product of having these two viruses, and everything else that has been any kind of normality for me, I've had to really fight for. I've had to fight so hard to feel like a normal person.
What's the impact of everything you've described being upon your parents?
The impact upon my parents, yeah. As I said earlier, my mother mostly looked after my health issues, appointments, and also when I was on being treated at home for my bleeds, it was mostly my mum that was giving me injections. She had a huge battle with herself later on in life because she felt like she felt like she'd given me the infected doses of factor VIII, and that's still with her today. She hasn't bounced back from that, and I don't think she will unless I could find out which batches of factor actually infected me. My mum had a breakdown. My mum and my dad became distant. Later on, they divorced. I felt, not because of my mother and father's breakup, but I just felt scared and lost for most of the time. My sister felt neglected. The whole household was affected by this. And I'm sure, that's an ongoing theme for a lot of people. But, somebody I feel needs to answer, or there need to be some answers for any kind of healing to occur for myself and other people in my community. I believe it would help a hell of a lot.
So your wife, you've touched on the impact upon your wife of looking after you and all the very substantial physical health problems that you have experienced over the last few years. What's the ongoing impact for your wife and your daughter?
Okay, so we try and we try and shield our daughter as much as we can. It was difficult when I was in hospital for my quadruple bypass, because there were a lot of difficulties. I bled huge amounts. I was in critical care for a long time, and I had to be opened 3 times for them to clear out all the blood in my body. And my daughter didn't know where I was. Obviously, she's now, and we couldn't tell her where I was. So she had to live without her dad for these 38 days that I was in hospital. My wife has basically, she's my carer. She's, when I can't research some of these illnesses, she's doing research for me or for us. My wife has had to put her career on hold. We just live off of my finances. It's especially the last 5 years have been incredibly hard. I've got one kidney now that could last 15 to 20 years if I'm lucky, and then I'll need another one. I've had my arteries replaced with a vein from my leg, and hopefully they will last 10 to 15 years, and then they will need further work. So, it's never over. It's never going to be over now. And at one stage in my life, I thought it was going to be over. I'd make plans for myself and my wife, and plans that we couldn't fulfill, or would be incredibly hard to fulfill. The impact of having 2 viruses has just I want to say destroyed my life, but it's not destroyed me. I'm a survivor. I'm not a victim. I'm a survivor, and I will do my best with what I've got, as I've already said. It just, things keep coming up, and I'm basically scared. I'm scared for my future. I feel like a ticking time bomb, especially with the kidney. In my lifetime, I'll need another kidney. In my lifetime, I'll need my heart arteries worked on again. And that creates a hell of a lot of anxiety, the post-traumatic stress. So although things got better at one stage when we got new antiretrovirals, better haemophilia treatment, it's not over for me, and it never will be. That's the way I feel.
No,
and more than that, it's not over for my family, my daughter. My daughter's 3 years old.
Your education was very significantly disrupted because of your illnesses. But a few years ago, you decided you wanted to use your skills in a positive way, and you undertook voluntary work, but you've not been able to earn a living from it. And you describe yourself in your statement as having to live on what you term as handouts from the ex gratia support schemes. I wondered if you could tell us what your experience has been of those schemes, the McFarlane Trust, etc., and latterly the EIBSS.
So if I talk about the Trust or the England Infected Blood Support Scheme, the other day I was talking about the money we receive from them, and I was referring to them as payments, and I realised what I was saying when I said the word payment. You know, I'm not doing a job. This isn't a payment. I'm not being paid for anything. And what am I being paid for? The wording just felt ridiculous, and it felt ridiculous, and I can't think of the right word. Incompetent, incomplete. With regards to using the schemes, I'd heard about how difficult it had been from early years. I'd heard about how difficult it had been to apply for grants, and I decided I didn't want to have to feel like that, so I wouldn't apply for grants. I was tired. I didn't want to fill out forms. I didn't want to answer intrusive questions. I didn't want to have to justify what I needed in the form of answering a bunch of questions about basically I was going to say personal income, but income even sounds terrible to me. But the way in which I use the money that they supply me with, I don't want to answer those questions. It feels demoralising. So when the scheme changed from the Macfarlane Trust to the England Infected Blood Support Scheme, which I think is a disgusting name, and nothing really changed. You know, not much changed. You talk to them on the phone, and they don't even know. They don't even know what you're asking them. They don't understand. I believe that the training they've been given is inadequate. The people that answer the phones, phone operators. There are a few people you can talk to that actually understand or realise what you may need. I just try and stay away from them as much as I can.
Those are the questions I have for you, but I'm just going to move away from the screen and ask Ms Monaghan, who represents you, if there's anything further she'd like me to ask you.
Thank you.
There are the 2 points that Ms Monaghan asks me to raise with you. One is about the uncertainty over the potential long-term implications of the drugs that you have been receiving over the years. You're the generation that has been through these various drugs, and I think you wanted to say something about that.
Yes. In effect, we are the people that are surviving today. We're the longest standing community of people that have been using these drugs. So essentially, again, the doctors, the healthcare, they're learning a lot from us, but we are suffering potentially life-threatening and life-debilitating illnesses from some of the side effects of these drugs and the way that they work. I've not looked into chemistry. I don't know how they work, but I know they have been destructive to some people. I believe there's not enough screening of potential long-term implications of the drugs. Although, you know, I'm looked after very well at my haemophilia centre, which also manages my HIV care. And I always thought that. I always thought, I'm safe here. They won't let anything happen to me. But it already has. Being my kidney issues, the heart artery issues. And I mean, I always said to my wife, at least my heart's good. You know, we can count on that. But I can't. And so again, not enough. It's not enough screening of potential long-term implications of these drugs, I feel.
And the second point that Ms Monaghan has asked me to raise is something that happened during your last hospital stay. There was a life-threatening error of some kind that was questioned by your wife.
So that actually falls into two different categories, actually. At the moment, there's a new product for haemophiliacs, a new wonder drug, like Factor 8 was heralded in the 70s, a wonder drug. Now, my haemophilia centre wanted me to start this new drug. It will clot my blood for a week at a time, so I'll need, and I won't bleed. It's an amazing new drug. They were pushing for me to have this, I think it was at the beginning of 2018. And obviously, now we know I had this underlying issue with my arteries in my heart. If they had given me this new drug then, I would have had a heart attack on the spot and died. Because, as I say, it clots your blood, I don't know, pretty much immediately, and for up to 7 days or more. Now, once I would have infused this drug, there wouldn't have been a way to clear my body of it, or not easily anyway. But because of the arterial damage I had, I would have dropped dead, basically, as soon as injecting it. Also, the other issue I had while I was in hospital, having my open heart surgery, there was an incident while I was an inpatient with my clotting medication. It's a medication called Factor 7A or Novo 7. And when I have operations, I've got an inhibitor, so I use different clotting factors to someone without an inhibitor. And this Factor 7A was given to me over 24 hours on a syringe pump driver, similar to a drip. But this is an incident happened with that in IOR, that's intensive overnight recovery, with very highly trained nurses, one-to-one care, and it's supposed to be one of the safest places in the hospital. The pump that was being used to infuse me with my blood clotting medication, there was an issue, and when pumps or drips have an issue, they sound an alarm. The alarm sounded, I mean, I wasn't aware of this because I was asleep, but I know more of the facts now. The alarm sounded, my nurse came over and just silenced the alarm. He didn't check why it wasn't working properly. The alarm sounded a further 2 times, so 3 times maximum, and then he unplugged the machine. Now, I have no idea why he unplugged the machine. All I can think is he was fed up with listening to it. I don't know. He was very busy and didn't want to deal with me, even though I had one-to-one care with this nurse. And then I went a whole night without having any life-saving medication. I had no blood clotting medication for about 8 or 9 hours. And I then bled profusely. I bled internally into my chest and needed to be opened up. I think this was the 3rd time for them to clear out all the blood. And my lung collapsed because of the amount of blood in my chest was pressing against my lung. That's negligence. That's disgusting behaviour in my opinion. A highly trained nurse giving you one-to-one care, just deciding to turn your machine off. It makes no sense to me at all. So I am, me and my wife are following proceedings to find out what happened.
Those are the questions that I have for you. Is there anything that you would like to add?
To be honest, I feel I've covered everything I wanted to. As I said, I'm scared for the future. Well, I'm scared for the future of my wife and child. They just live off of my finances. If anything happens to me in years' time, couple of years' time. I don't know exactly how they would survive. My wife's been severely affected by all of the implications, especially over the last few years, and has quite serious health anxiety, and her own mental health has been affected by these issues. Apart from being scared for myself, I'm scared for my wife and child if I was to die, basically. And, I can't emphasize enough the impact of having two viruses. It's just, it's affected me, or it's affected me in a way that, even I didn't think they could, from becoming undetectable to HIV when I was 21 and believing that life was going to be better from then on. It's been incredibly difficult because of the stress my body's been under, the multiple illnesses I've had over the years. I just don't think it's going to end. I'm lucky to have a very supportive wife and a fantastic daughter, and my whole family supporting me.
Thank you. Sir Brian?
It was important evidence to hear your story. For someone as anxious as you are, having overcome so many difficulties and challenges, it has been particularly impressive that you felt able to come here and give it, and for that I am really very thankful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And if we can cut the video link now.
There is one thing I need to say before we break, and we'll break until 2:45. For those of you who heard a name being mentioned earlier in the evidence, you must remember that to you, he is and will remain Mr. A.H. Thank you very much. 2:45.